Good evening. Welcome to Stories Rock, an evening of true personal stories. And tonight we will hear some wonderful stories about race, about how our lives have been colored, shaped, and affected by race. So thank you so much for coming. I'm Leah Ruckberg, producer of Stories Rock and your host tonight. Mary Finucane co-leads the Rochester Veterans Writing Group at Writers and Books and does fundraising for a local nonprofit. She loves to spend time with her spirited 11-year-old daughter. She also enjoys writing, story listening, tea drinking, and learning new things. And a little known fact about Mary is that if you will go to her house just about any time in the world, you will smell something wonderful coming right out of the oven. Tonight she will read, This Is How It Looks.
My first year of college, I learned that our school had a study abroad program in Ireland. I knew instantly that I would go, though I did not know how. The option to study abroad was available to juniors, so I had nearly 2 years to plan and save and dream. I picked an Irish university that was closest to my aunts and grandmother, and I pictured that I would study there and probably just stay to live for the rest of my life. Life is weirdly wonderful if we let it be so. Over the following months, I stopped by the Office of Study Abroad to get updates, forms, and just because I loved all the posters from different countries that hung on the walls. One day as I entered, I saw a flyer on the door, Cultural Student Exchange within the U.S. A few details were listed, and I felt my heart leap. I opened the door slowly, walked in to pick up the forms. I asked the woman working in the office about the U.S. exchange program. It was a swap of sorts between my college, a mostly white, Catholic, liberal arts, New England school, and an all-black Southern Baptist college in Georgia. She told me it was the third year that they were offering it, and so far, no students had opted for the exchange either way. The flyer remained on the door, and each time I stopped by the Office of Study Abroad for more forms to go to Ireland, I asked more questions about this college. All black? All Baptist? Had anyone signed up yet? I wanted to meet someone who had done it, who could answer my questions. But no one could because no one had. The pull to do this was met by new imaginings, which prompted me to leave the office after each visit and walk around my college picturing what it might be like to be black and Southern Baptist, moving through the snow and fast bad drivers and statues of Mother Mary and St. Dominic that sprung up here and there. The woman at the study abroad office kept fielding my questions. Does a school require students to attend church? What kind of religious rules are there? These were the questions that I verbalized, and also the ones that I cared least about. What stopped me was something that came up each time I considered bagging Ireland, the expense and the familiarity of it, opting instead to head down south for a program that had no cost and a lot of unknowns. As soon as I got close to this, there would be a flip turn as I pictured entering a cafeteria, a white student among a sea of black students. This particular thing came to mind repeatedly. Sometimes I imagined that some students were ambassadors for Christ and would have to offer me a seat and let me eat my sandwich with them, which felt bad. In this imagining, I wanted to apologize for imposing. In other versions, there were no ambassadors for Christ, just disinterest, by scanning the tables for a place to sit and eat while casually studying my soup or pretending to read a book. I could picture praying in a new way. I could picture going to class, but given the unstructured social chaos of any given college cafeteria, and I suddenly pictured months of loneliness spread out, feeling like a fool and a loner for embarking on what? This imagining deterred me. I walked through my own college cafeteria and noticed the social structure was first divided by athletes. Teammates ate together, but after that, a self-imposed segregation took place. I did not go to the all-black Southern Baptist College. I never tested my imagining to see if it was bunk or real. I just got on a plane and I did what I said I was going to do. I went to a country where everyone looked like me. Like, really looked like me. Freckled and so white the sun glared off them. And here's the kicker. It was not what I imagined. At times, I was nearly swallowed by the understanding that a sea of people who looked like me was no guarantee of connection. Prior to studying there, my only experiences in Ireland had been time spent with family in a small village where I was doted on and treated like family. My childish mind had attributed this notion to the entire nation. The reality was that the Irish talked faster and were more shy or more polite or witty or less interested or a whole range of other options that I had not stopped to consider. I lived with Germans and Americans, and when I entered the cafeteria, I noticed that US students ate together, and Germans ate together, and Irish ate together. After college, I took a job as a teacher in South Dakota. I lived and taught on an Indian reservation, and none of the students looked like me, and I was over the whole idea and fear of eating alone in the cafeteria. I connected with some staff more than others. I lived with other teachers, and life there was at first a big learning curve, and then something I was suddenly used to. One Saturday, I was in a baking mood, and I walked to our small trading post to buy eggs and flour so I could make a cake. It was sunny, I was in a bright mood. This town had 400 people, and the students who lived there were shy for months and months and months, and then one day, as if a group decision had been made, I was permitted in. The shyness, like a tough exterior, folded. It came along with being made fun of, which was comfortable because I'm Irish and that's kind of the love language that we speak. If you could laugh at yourself, it decreased some of the language barriers. In this trading post, I picked up eggs and flour and I got in line. I eyed the single-serving cigarettes that were for sale for 10 cents a piece, but decided not to chance purchase in case a student or worse, grandmother of a student was nearby. The line was 6 people deep and I was center. An old woman was at the counter talking with the cashier. There was something being discussed. Incorrect change or payment. I don't know what it was because I was thinking about my cake and plotting the remainder of my day. The conversation became more animated, heated even, and the old woman gathered her wallet and said, "I'm asking you for what this is supposed to cost. That is what I'm doing." Then she turned and pointed at me. "And you white people, you've taught us just how to do that, how to go after whatever you want and take whatever you want, haven't you?" The store became silent. She walked out the door, bells jingling. I bought my eggs and flour, though I wanted to put them down and leave without looking up. I felt both shame and anger. Anger because, what the hell, lady, I just want to make a cake. And shame because what she said had truth in it. I walked home with both these emotions, wanting to tell her I am not all white people, and I did not steal her land and language, and simultaneously wanting to apologize because I am white and white people did steal her land and language. I was in tears by the time I got home, and when I relayed the incident to my housemate, a white guy from Indiana, he nodded with neither judgment nor sympathy. After a bit of quiet, he said, "You're 22 and this is the first time you've ever had someone assign to you the worst part of your race. Pretty lucky if you ask me. Imagine if it happened more frequently." In my head, I called him a rat bastard. But I knew it was true when he said it. I talked with students about the incidents. Some of the girls, tender 5th and 6th graders, said, "Teacher, I wouldn't have laughed if I was there." One of the boys, the one I think of as truth teller to this day, said, "Ease, I'd be laughing way out loud, old grandmother messing with your cake." This boy was the one who on 9/11, when confusion and chaos were unfolding, and staff called for a quiet moment to pray for those in New York, he's the one who refused to bow his head. He looked up, bright dark eyes, and said, "You think those people in New York would be praying for us if we had planes crash into our school? You think they'd stop and pray if the whole reservation had a bomb on it? They don't even know we exist. I'm not praying for them." I went to graduate school. I arrived from South Dakota, and by the end of my first semester, I didn't know how I was going to buy books for my next semester. I was working 2 student craft jobs, I had financial aid, and I was living with undergraduate students as a glorified RA, which provided my housing and meals. I then fell into a bad habit that I'd picked up in college when funds were tight. I scanned the advertisements for paid drug studies. The last drug study I had done for hire was to be a guinea pig for a drug-drug interaction between 2 psychotropic medications. My pee turned orange, I turned yellow, and then I got paid. The drug studies varied in pay. In the past, highest pay went to those who were willing to receive the new HIV vaccine. I had a limit to what I could commit to, and turning yellow was about as far as I could go. After screening the studies, I saw one that looked like a match. It took place a week before classes began, involved sleep deprivation, 5 days in New Jersey, and would cover books and more. I circled it with a Sharpie and breathed a sigh of relief. Problem solved. I went back to Rochester for the holidays, and then a week before the semester began, I got in my car and I drove to a squat gray building in New Jersey. I walked through glass doors up to a counter to check in. It was busy, and those who worked there had on white lab coats. Those without lab coats were, I assumed, there to offer their body to science. I was directed to a large waiting area. Half the seats were filled with people filling out forms. Every person filling out a form was a black man. None of them had on lab coats. I took a seat and began signing waivers along with them. A few minutes later, I looked up as the glass doors parted. A long white van pulled up to the entrance. A person in a white lab coat opened the door, and a dozen more black men got out and walked up to the counter. They were given forms. They took seats. Another van load of black men pulled up and emptied. Now the waiting room was full. Whatever denial I had employed to act as if this was a choice I felt good about making was fading as I saw reflected around me the varying forms of desperation, which is the only thing that propels someone to sign a bunch of waivers to see what might happen from putting harmful amounts of substances into their body. So I looked down at my forms because what was I going to do? Go back to school and not buy books? There was no layaway plan at the student bookstore. I finished my forms and turned them in at the front desk. When I went back to the waiting room, I saw a white woman among the black men. I knew her. Not only did I know her, I was friends with her, had gone to high school with her, had had pie at a diner with her a week ago when we were home on break. She was living in New York City. I said her name and she looked up, and again, desperation reflected back to me. The entire waiting room, that's all it held. I watched her scribbling in answers, and it struck me how this was not a good idea for her at all. Part of this drug study involved ongoing doses of aspirin. My friend was allergic to aspirin. She swelled up like a balloon, including her throat and air passages. I said her name and said, "You can't do this, you'll get sick." She looked up and then went back to filling in the forms faster. "There's lethal amounts of aspirin, you won't be able to breathe," I said. She said what I felt and what seemed to surround us. "I have to do this." A lab coat called my name and I followed her to a back room. She took my vitals, then she left, and a man in a lab coat came in with my forms. He looked at them slowly, then he looked at me, then he looked back at my forms, then back at me. Then he went on reading my forms, and finally he looked up and began detailing risk, after risk, after risk. He stated the risks slowly. He was taking his time outlining the risks. He filled the air with the risks, the possible side effects, the fact that they couldn't really say how each person might respond to the 5 days of concoctions. He let all that information linger in the air. "Why are you doing this study?" he asked. I told him I needed money to buy books for my semester. He asked about my course of study. He asked if there were job opportunities in the summer break. He asked what I wanted to do when I graduated. He asked about my interests, what kind of work I wanted to do, and what I had done before entering the graduate program. Here is what he was doing. He was outlining in detail the short-term, high-risk decision I was making against the long arc of my life and the possibilities that lay ahead, the things I could not see or even think of because desperation blocks the ability to think long-term. Desperation yells, "Now, now, now," and spins into panic, and this drug study was my answer. He was making me hold this supposed answer, which involved my health, against the goals of my life, which would benefit from my having health. The conversation was long. I told him 3 times I needed to do this, and he would nod as though this was it, and then he would ask more about paid internships, work study, any of those options. Then he'd highlight more long-term side effects, none of which could be known right now because the drug was too new to know much for sure. I left that day. My friend left that day. She had lied on the forms. She had said she wasn't allergic to anything, but she had gone into a waiting room with another lab coat and then left. We didn't chat or hug and barely said goodbye. We had come anonymously to get money and were leaving without it. I left with my health, but also with a despair, which was this. I knew I had been given a gift in that conversation, and when I walked past yet another van that was bringing another dozen black men of all ages in, I did not imagine that they were getting the same gift. I did not imagine they were having the same conversation. I felt grateful, I felt sick. I wanted to take the thing that I was handed and go to each person in the waiting room and say, there must be a different way. Your body is your vehicle. You're going to need it for your next feat. The men filled the chairs, the men got the forms, the men looked down and signed page after page. I stood outside the doors. I wanted to go back in to the man in the lab coat and say to them what you said to me. Ask them the same questions. Value them the way you just valued me. Give them the gift of time, of considering their worth. A lab coat was cleaning out the van. Where do you go pick people up, I asked her. She told me they drive around Newark. That's it. I got in my car and I left New Jersey. I was broke, I was healthy, I was broken by knowing that my life had been given a value based on arbitrary things, a degree, a whiteness. I had been assumed to have a future and had been asked to think about that because it mattered. I got the degree, I got a job in Philadelphia. I worked in a job that I loved in a field that I felt passionate about. I sat one day with a couple I was seeing their child for therapy. The couple began with something that was concerning them. We're not racist, the dad said. Then they described that the child had been playing more, which we had included as part of a plan to help the parents observe her and see her world. They were distraught as they described the way their 6-year-old daughter loved to play teacher. It was really cute at first, the mom said. She set up all her dolls, she got chairs, she had on my high heel shoes, and she was so tender with her dolls. Then once she has it all set up, the mom looked down and the dad continued. Then she stands in front of all the dolls and she says, listen up! All the black kids go to the back of the room. All the white kids come sit up here by me so you can learn. I swear we don't talk like this at home. The dad seemed afraid that I was going to get out a ruler and start smacking him. I asked him what happened next. Well, we yelled at her, he said. I told her not to play like that, and she stopped. But then a couple days later, she was doing it again. I advised the parents to let her play. I told them to just observe and not correct it. Let her play be a clue to what she sees and experiences in the world. A few weeks later, I received an update. The mom told me, I brought her to school like I always do. I go in the mornings and I drop her off. I know where she sits and I know where her friends sit. But today I went into the class toward the end of the day to drop off cupcakes for her birthday. She leaned forward. Do you know at the end of the day, all the white kids were in seats up front and all the black kids were in the back of the room. So I didn't say anything until later, and then I asked her, how come her friend was in the back of the room? And she told me that every day the teacher has to move kids so the ones who want to learn can learn, and the ones who don't want to learn can go to the back of the room. It turns out that the teacher never, ever stood in front of the class and instructed all the white kids and all the black kids to sit in different sections. She didn't have to be so explicit, but the kids understood. Kids see what is unsaid in very clear terms. They sense, they understand. Sometimes when they speak that, we all freak out, but often they're just showing what is unsaid.